Welcome back to the Christ and Culture. This is Clint.
And this is Gordon.
And we're back for another week. I'm barely awake. It's a good thing we're recording in my bedroom because I'm going to pass out as soon as we're done.
While we record.
I don't know if it's the weather. It's been really dreary around here lately, or if it's the fact that I got 4 hours of sleep last night.
It's probably the latter.
Probably a combination.
You're waking up at 5 a.m.
For sure.
Yep.
How's your transition back to the real world post honeymoon been going?
It's been good. I don't know. I thrive kind of in work mode, and so that's been fun, but have not settled on a solid sleep routine.
Mm-hmm.
That's just also harder when there's someone else in the bed, just to be like, I don't want to get out. I just want to lay here with that person.
Yeah.
So, which is fine, but it's super not helpful.
Yeah. Not productive.
No. Especially when I'm like, I'm going to get up and pray. I can't do that. I got to go to work. So.
Yeah.
It's been okay.
So the other question that everyone wants to know, what is your Super Bowl analysis post-game?
What's my Super Bowl analysis?
Yeah, give us the highlights of the game.
Okay.
Based off of everything that you saw and experienced.
Yeah, well, there was a great interception one time.
Mm-hmm.
I think someone won ultimately.
I think so.
And some people lost. But really, in the end,
we're all winners.
Kind of won.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all winners.
And just give a shout out to the state of Kansas for their win. And yeah, it was great. Halftime show was killer. A lot of good themes, messages.
A lot of not good themes.
Yeah, I mean, it was cultural.
It was ups and downs.
Yeah, it was a roller coaster. And the food was great. So.
Food is good.
Yeah.
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 We went to a Super Bowl party, but neither of us really watch football, so we got glimpses.
Yeah, I will watch football, but if there's other things going on that
there's board games.
Yeah, well, they're a little
board
more,
games
a little more
or
fun
football.
For me. I really like the Super Bowl. I do, and I wanted the 49ers to win over the Chiefs, but there wasn't two teams I was crazy about, so I really had no investment in it as I have in the past.
I wore a color that was good for both teams.
Yeah.
So went for the red look. Really didn't care. With that, other than the Super Bowl, which we kind of took we had a break from our fasting for Exodus 90. That was the one thing that we relaxed. Other than that, what have you been taking in?
A lot of things that you can't.
Wonderful. Okay.
I mentioned at the Super Bowl party, I watched Heavyweights recently, the Fat Camp movie.
Yeah.
I've gotten into some new podcasts, probably ones I won't continue during this Exodus because they're great, but they're more comedy related, and so it's like I don't know if this is really
more entertaining than
yeah. But one's called the Dollop, and it's basically just two comedians that tackled kind of history, or what's it called when something happens in the news?
The news?
Sure. Or news.
I don't know.
But it's hilarious because they just kind of tell the story, but they're comedians, so they just riff on it the whole time.
So it's like late night, but podcast version.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I listened to the first episode and I was in tears. And then I listened to the other one was called How Did This Get Made? And it's three comedians that just go over synopses of movies that should never been made and just tear it apart. I listened to the first two, and the second was on Spider-Man 3. And they just they just tore it apart. But it's hilarious.
Spider-Man 3,
with Venom and of the first trilogy.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, that was pretty rough.
Yeah.
Or Avatar, the live action.
I'm sure it's in there.
It's gotta be.
They just take it apart. And that's I've been playing a ton of Cuphead.
Oh yeah.
I gotta beat it before I go full Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's about it.
Oh, that's not nearly as much as I expected.
Yeah, I feel like I had more because I feel like I skipped out on some things last week, but I can't remember. I started reading a new book. I don't know if I mentioned it last week. Here it is, Faith for Exiles.
I don't think you mentioned that. No.
No, I just started reading it. Literally, I got it last week we recorded, but I didn't read it yet. And it's kind of like an iGen book. So like being an exile in a technology sense. I forgot how.
Okay.
I just read like the forward so far.
Mm-hmm.
And we're reading it as directors within a door and discussing it. Yeah. Yeah, so I haven't gotten like into the good stuff yet, but I will let you know.
Cool.
How it is.
Yeah, especially if it's generational stuff. I've been really into that. So
yeah, it is
posted.
Generational. What
Cool.
about you? What have you been receiving?
Mostly Christian music and books, because that's really about all I can take in.
Yeah, you read like 50 books.
I'm about to finish my 7th book so far, and it's the first week of February. So, but I finished Ready Player One. I don't know if I mentioned I started that last week, but
yeah,
crushed through that in like 4 days. It was awesome. The new one that I just started, and I'm already over halfway through, is Thrawn. So we talked to Taylor Scholl about that back on our Star Wars episode, and I found the Thrawn trilogy. So
that's the bad guy.
It's the bad guy.
Rebel.
Yeah.
From Rebels.
But so the one I'm reading right now starts about 10 years before Rebels, where the Empire first finds Thrawn, and then his ascent to power.
Okay.
And so it's a 10-year story of
how he became who you met him to be.
Right. Yeah, and one of the coolest things about the book so far is that a lot of the times, you know how the author will describe the setting and stuff like that.
Right.
Instead of just describing the setting, it's all done through Thrawn's perspective, because like Taylor explained, he's very analytical. He notices every little detail, and so it's told through his eyes, and you see every like small muscle movement and clenching, and so that's how he interprets people's reactions to what he says. It's really interesting.
That is really cool.
So I've been reading those two, and then as far as music, I was on a Brother Isaiah kick for a little bit.
Okay.
So he's pretty solid.
He's great.
I know we've talked about him before. I was on Gregorian Chant for a little bit, just trying to hit
also great
all the bases, you know. Danielle Rose, who I've definitely talked about on here before, she has, oh my gosh, she's like one of my favorite Catholic musicians, and the songs that she sings, you actually have to like think about them. So she has like one that's told from the perspective of the rose bush that the crown of thorns came from.
Oh,
yeah. And so it's a bunch of really cool stuff like that.
It's a song.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's like 5 or 6 minutes long too.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Maher, Audrey, Assad, so the big ones, and then Rita West, who is a little bit smaller of a musician compared to Audrey, Assad, and Maher, but she's really, really good. I think she's from Louisiana, somewhere in the South.
Okay.
So not too far from here. But she has this song called Invitation that I really like.
Right.
And we were thinking about putting that as the theme song for our summer camp. But I don't think that's what we're going to go with. So sorry, Rita, if you're listening. But it is really, really good, and I've listened to it a lot. So that's what I'm taking in.
Sweet.
And you have one more.
I do have one more. It's an oldie but a goodie. I rewatched it recently because me and Lizzie still don't have like internet. So even though I sort of can, I still feel guilty about it, but sort of can watch things. We don't like have the capability to get onto Netflix or Disney Plus unless we like hotspot it, which we can do, but it's not ideal all the time. So I have like DVDs, but by the time it's like late, there's like certain things we're in the mood for. So we wanted just like a good comedy. So I rewatched Yes Man for the first time in a long time.
So, but you've seen it a couple times before?
Yeah, I own it.
Okay.
I love it. I think it's a great movie.
Okay.
I realized today when I was looking it up, it got terrible reviews.
Yeah, that's why I never went and watched it. It just
I think it's a great movie with a great message. Actually, what the synopsis you sent me wasn't accurate in the sense of like people like walking all over him. It was not, but
okay.
Everything else is true.
I literally only have seen the trailer.
Okay, but I also love Jim Carrey. So that's another thing. I'm a little biased sometimes, but yeah, no, it's a really funny movie, really good message. And I was watching it, not thinking I'm going to do a podcast about it, but literally like the whole time I was like, oh, this would be so easy to talk about. And so essentially we can dive right in. It's about Jim Carrey's character's name is Carl, and you quickly find out in the very beginning, like just through dialogue and stuff, that he was married and is no longer married. His wife left him either like 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
And because of that, his demeanor has changed to where he just turns down opportunities, turns down hanging out with friends. He has 2 really good friends, but he never hangs out with them. He just like ignores their phone calls. He's just a homebody who just stays home. His routine is like buying a Redbox movie and watching it at home, and then going to work every day. And he works at a bank where people come to him to try to get loans for small businesses or like ideas and stuff, and he usually rejects them. Other thing, he just says no, essentially, to life.
Oh, yeah, I was way off basis. I see what's going on.
Yeah. And so I have the first dialogue I want to jump into was that idea. It's with his friend Peter, who's actually
Bradley Cooper.
Yeah, Bradley Cooper. Exactly. And this is his best friend, and he misses his engagement party. Like when the first scene is when they trick him to go hang out with them, and you realize it's been a while because he's like, "You guys are engaged? Wow, you guys are moving quick. It's been like 6 months." And they're like, "Carl, we've been together for 2 years." So he's just not catching on. And so this is the conversation I have when he comes. He's like, he misses the engagement party, and he comes to confront him about it in his apartment. He's like, "This wasn't just drinks at a bar, Carl. This was my engagement party. You only get married once." He's like, "Well, I wouldn't certainly do it again." So he's like being a Debbie Downer. He's like, "I know, Carl. I know that Stephanie left you and you freaked because of it, but this isn't about you. This is about me. When's the last time you did anything fun? You're always making excuses. I don't want to commit. I don't want to get tied down. I mean, do you even know my fiance's last name?" Like, "Yeah, it's Fishman. Wait, Fishwall? It's Lucy Burns, Carl." And guess what? She doesn't even like my best friend. And I keep trying to think of reasons why she should, but you know what? I can't think of any. And he starts to like try to stop as he was walking away. And he's like, "I don't want to hear any excuses, Carl. You do whatever you want. I'm just telling you, if you don't change your life, you're going to end up a lonely guy." And I remember we were watching that, and Lizzie's like, he's a good friend. Because he's given him like a million chances. Mm-hmm. But also, he's not like just mad at him. He is. But he's like, this is like just anger. And he's being really like intentional with how he's trying to correct Carl. Like,
right.
You're being selfish, and I understand where you are, but now what you're doing is affecting other people.
Yeah, it's like in scripture where it says, if your brother sins against you, go to him in person.
Right.
And if he doesn't change, then go to him with 2 or 3 others. And then bring the community or the church. And if he doesn't listen, then cut him off. But like he's given him the chances. He's had this fraternal correction, which we've talked about a lot. Because like that's something that's really big with both of us. Like we really appreciate when someone calls us out on stuff like that. And I think that's really big.
Yeah. And I think he does appreciate it because that night he has a dream that he's like dead on the couch. And there's like flies, and the friends come in to hang out at the apartment, and they're like, "Hey, Carl, what's up?" And they're talking to him, and they're like, "Wait, do you think he's dead?" He's like, "I don't know. He doesn't look any different than I usually see him." He's like, "I don't know. Yeah, if he only came around more, maybe we'd know." And like he's dreaming it, but then
right.
He wakes up in like a cold sweat. And previously, he had met an old friend of his who came to the bank and told him about this seminar because his life was radically changed by just saying the word yes to everything. And so when he wakes up from that dream, he sees this pamphlet.
So it's like a motivational speaker.
Oh yeah, super motivational speaker. So he sees that pamphlet and is like, "I'm gonna go. Like I don't want to. I'm gonna go," because Peter talked some sense into him. So he goes, and they do the same thing, that might happen at some of your churches on a Sunday, where they're like, "We want to like acknowledge the newcomers."
Oh my gosh.
So who's new here? And his friend who invited him was like, "My friend here." And he's like trying to like shrink up. And so the main speaker ends up like running to him, like with microphone. And
didn't Joel talk about this when he was on too? Joel Stepanek?
Yes, man.
I know how he hates when you go to a church and they make you stand up.
Totally. Yeah. Birthdays, anniversaries, anyone?
Anyone know anyone who's ever celebrated anything before? Stand them up.
Yeah.
Get up here.
Round of applause. Yeah, and so he confronts him because he's like, "Do you want to come up?" And he said no. And when he says no, the entire crowd starts mocking him like. And so he runs to him, and this guy's name is Terrence. He's the motivational speaker, as you will. And he's like, "Let me guess. Someone taught you into coming here, didn't they?" He said, yes. Yes! And just imagine, every time he says yes, the whole crowd just screams, yes! And every time he says no, the whole crowd just like mocks him. And so he's like, and you're not sure about this, are you, Carl? He's like, no. No, man! No, man! No, man! No, man! You're dead, Carl. You say no to life, and therefore you're not living. You make up excuses to the people around you and yourself. You're stuck in the same dead-end job you've been for years. You don't have a girlfriend. You don't have anything close to a girlfriend. And you lost the love of your life because she couldn't be with someone who didn't live theirs. Am I right, Carl? And Carl's like shocked because it's exactly his life. But he's also like, I have been like, shamefully, like I have been having a little trouble. I was like, we're going to make a covenant, Carl. Would you like to make a covenant? Yes. Yes! Every time an opportunity presents itself, no matter what it is, you will say yes. And Carl's like, well, what if I say the other word? Because he doesn't want to say no anymore. And he's like, you'll be making a promise to yourself. And when you break a promise to yourself, things can get a little dicey. So what do you say? Are you ready to make a covenant? And he says yes. And he like, yes! Really makes him say yes, like a bunch, to where like Carl feels it and is like changed a little bit. Yeah. We can stop there. So originally this whole movie, and you'll see the simple takeaway is saying yes to life. And that line, I actually don't pull that line up anywhere else, but they do say that a whole bunch. And there's two ways you could take that. One, it could be like the pro-choice or right to life thing, but I don't really want to do it that way. I just want to say like yes to life in this sense of the God's covenant with us, and yes to like a life of faith in Jesus. So is there anything that we've covered so far that you'd want to break open more, or?
Yeah, I think a couple things with that last one. I think the whole saying yes to life is kind of interesting, especially how you're saying yes to a relationship with Jesus, because we talk about how that's new life. Right. Something I like to ask people, especially like confirmation students and stuff, is, do you know your baptismal date? Because that's the date, if we truly believe what the church teaches about our baptism, that's the date where we truly found life, right? So the baptism symbolizes the drowning, so the death to our old life, and then the life that comes from the water is our new life, where we're reborn as sons and daughters of Christ. Yeah. And so do you know your baptismal date as well as you know your birthday? And if not, why? Right. I talked to some teens a couple weeks ago, I think, and convinced them to go ask their parents if they could celebrate their baptism as they celebrate their birthday. Their parents are probably not going to like that, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, just like appreciating what that means, that we're reborn in Christ and what that looks like. I think that's really big. And then going off of that, like we talk about on here, our life and our spiritual journey is an adventure. And this is going into like The Hobbit, right? Where Bilbo keeps denying the adventure and denying the adventure and denying the adventure. And eventually it just takes that one little yes, and it radically changes his life. And he asks Gandalf whether or not it'll be safe, or whether or not he'll return. And Gandalf is like, I can't promise you that, and if you do return, you're not going to be the same person. Yeah. And it's the same thing for our life and our spiritual journey. Like, if you come back, you're not going to come back the same person. No. And same thing with
that called the arc, or the
hero's arc.
Is that, I think, where when they begin, when they come back, they're completely changed.
Yeah, I think that's the hero's arc.
Okay, yeah.
Joseph Campbell talks about that kind of stuff. But yeah, and same thing in C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, where is Aslan a safe lion? No, he's not safe, but he is good.
And that's what I wanted to talk about just now as we're cracking that open, is like how big that 3-letter word is. Yes, because it's simple, but I think like it's interesting that it's so scary to say that word. And I know we've talked about it on here before, but even with like iGen, and even they say it about the millennials too, and like what it takes to commit. And there's so many options nowadays. Yeah. That we don't like.
This is a huge pet peeve.
Or even for me, I know I fall into this sometimes, where I like make plans, and then the closer that date gets, I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore. Like I did, but I really don't want to play D&D on Friday. I'm just kidding. That was a jab. Deep cut.
Not that I've spent hours prepping that already, but
no, I'm just kidding. I do want to play.
And I get what you're saying, though. That's actually been something that's come up a lot in conversations recently, and it's been kind of a frustration for me, is the lack of people being able to commit. And I don't know if I mentioned it on here or just to you, but I think a lot of that comes down to, one, like you're hinting at, where we're so tied into so many different things that we're waiting for a better option to come. And someone brought this up to me one time when I was in college, how we do this. And if you think about it, what you're saying to someone when you do that is, what you're offering me, time with you, is someone else could give me something better,
right,
than you.
Sounds
your gift
enticing,
of yourself.
but it doesn't sound like the best option.
Right. And especially if someone's, so for myself, my love language is quality time. Mm-hmm. And so if someone tells me, like, you know, I might have a better option that I could spend my time with, that really hurts.
Right.
Like, that's literally one of the worst ways you can insult me.
Yeah.
Or like hurt me.
Cool.
Yeah. And so even if someone's love language isn't that, it's still something that you're telling that person that your time is not the most important thing. And I'm going to wait and see if someone else better than you might give me their time. Yeah. And it's kind of not directly saying that, but that's what your actions are implying. So there's that. Then there's also the fact that we're so obsessed with productivity and appearing active. We've talked about that before, saying active instead of busy all the time. We always want to appear busy and active, because if we're busy and active, that means we're productive to society.
Right. And
we're doing something good where people can value who we are. And because of that, we pretend like we're more busy and productive than we really are. And we make excuses, like he's talking about here, to avoid doing other things with other people.
Yeah.
Even at a detriment to ourselves and others.
And it's so interesting that the easy no just leads to loneliness and boredom, but yes leads to work and difficulty, going back to like C.S. Lewis and those stories, but joy and freedom. Mm-hmm. Like even in the trials. So yeah, and essentially in this moment, this is a turning point where he embarks on his adventure. And so he's leaving the big thing, and as he's getting in his car, this homeless man's like, "Hey, can you give me a ride to the park?" And obviously his friend overhears this, is like, "Yes, you're a yes man now." And he's like, "Sure." And so he gets in the car, and he's like, "Do you mind if I use your phone?" And the window's down. So he's like, "Yes, come on, you can do it." And he's like, so then they're driving like forever away, and the guy's just like chatting up a storm, like on the phone, which seems like friends and stuff. And then he's like, "Do I keep going?" And he's like, just a little bit further. Hold on. And he's upset that the guy interrupted him. And then they finally get somewhere in the park, and he's like, "Oh man, your phone died." And he's like, "Thanks." And then he's like, "Thanks, man. Can I have some money? Like, you have like a few bucks?" And he's like, "Sure." And he pulls out like some cash and like flips through it and gives him. He's like, "That's a lot of money. Can I have like all of it?" And then like laughs, like he thinks he's making a joke. And he's just like, "Sure." Because at this point he's annoyed, but he's still trying to say yes.
Oh my gosh.
And he's like, "Wow, man. God bless you." And then like just jumps into a
This
bush.
is Peter
This is the homeless man that he just helped.
Oh, homeless man.
Yeah, totally homeless man. And then he starts to turn around and drive away, and then his car stops moving because he ran out of gas. So his phone's dead. He ran out of gas, and he's like many, many, many miles away from home. And so he's like walking with the thing can, and he's like, "Yeah, help this person out. Just say yes. Let him talk on your phone until it dies. Give him all your money. Great." And all this stuff, to where it seems like he's done what he was told, and it's terrible. And then he's getting gas, and a new character, Allison, comes in, who's Zooey Deschanel, and she's on like a scooter, and she's filling up, and he's talking to himself still, like hanging, and she's like laughing and takes a picture of him. And then they meet, and she figures out what happened, and so she gives him a ride back. And while they're filling up, they're talking, and they're kind of joking, and yeah, they're just kind of hitting it off in a weird way, but he's not. He's just kind of being himself. And then she's like, "Okay, well, anything else I can do?" And he's like, "No." And he like mumbles to himself, like, "Unless you want to make out." And she's like, "What'd you say?" He's like, "What?" And so she kisses him, and then like gets on her scooter and like just like, "Have a good night," walks away. And like he looks in his pocket, and she gave him like the picture that he took of him like filling up gas. And he was like, just happy, and then drives home, and he stays up that night. He's looking at the picture and then sees the pamphlet from the seminar, and it says, yes always leads to something good. And he realized, like, that seemed like everything leading up to that seemed like the worst. He just lost money, all these things. But if he hadn't have done that and trekked down to the gas station, wouldn't have met her. And yeah, ultimately it was good.
So I want to jump in here.
Go ahead.
Because I see what you're trying to say, but also...
No, please, yeah.
I think we need to be clear, like, saying yes to everything is not always good. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of really bad things and really bad choices. And I think if you say this yes to everything is always good, that can very easily lead to relativism.
Yeah.
Where anything you say yes to, it's going to be a good option.
Right.
And that's obviously not true.
Right.
Right? We could say, murder. Hey, you want to go kill this guy? Yes.
Yeah, because you asked.
It's going to lead to something good. No, like, that's dumb. Right? But the way that we're talking about it, where this yes to life is a yes to an adventure or a yes to a calling, something that's a little bit more discerned and not just like thought through on our own, but like something that we've actually prayed through and like we're led to by God and not just...
No, yeah. Totally. And that's the issue that you see in this movie is after that, he's like, okay, I'm a yes man. I believe this. So he starts literally saying yes to everything. Like he's pulling up like ads that you get in your emails, like spam, or it's like Persian wife finder. And he's like, why not?
Prince in Africa.
Yeah. He's just saying yes to stuff, but he starts taking guitar lessons. He starts learning Korean. He starts giving out loans to everyone, no matter what they're asking.
Oh, he's going to lose his job.
He starts taking plane lessons, all these things. But there are, and that's what actually the next thing I want to talk about is like, there is a level to saying yes to life in the sense of like saying yes to an adventure, yes to Christ, yes to like living your life versus intentionally not living your life.
Right.
But there's a difference to saying yes to everything. Mm-hmm. Did you have a question?
Not a question. I was just going to say like one other thing about that though is if you do look at it in the way that we're describing as the good, so the saying yes to the call, the adventure that we're supposed to be on, when you say yes to that, it does always lead to good. And it might be hard. It might be difficult, kind of like the journeys we talked about in The Hobbit or in the Chronicles of Narnia. It might be painful, but God always makes good come from that.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, saying yes to what you're supposed to say yes to will always lead to good.
I used that in a youth group last week where we were talking about, we're going to the Valley of Dry Bones, but how that is a call to adventure, but what that means. And I used Spider-Man 2, Far From Home, and it's the scene where have you seen that?
Yeah.
Okay, it's the scene where he's talking to Happy on the plane, and he's defeated. Because originally he just wanted to live his normal life as a school kid, and then everyone's like, who's going to be the next Iron Man? You got to be the next Iron Man. And
I don't want to.
Yeah, but then he tries to and screws up completely. And now he's on this plane, he's like, I miss him. I can't do this. People are saying I can do this. And I've tried and I've just screwed up and made it worse. And Happy's like, look, you're not going to be Iron Man. No one can be Iron Man. Not even Iron Man can be Iron Man. He's like, but the one thing that he did right before he was gone was pick you. And he wouldn't have done what he did if he knew you weren't going to be around. And right now, yeah, you're in bad, like you're in deep doo-doo.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do about it? Like we can't just complain. And then he realizes like what he wanted wasn't maybe, but he said yes to being Spider-Man, and this is where it's put him now. Right. And you got to do something. Yeah. So it's not always going to be easy.
Well, I mean, this isn't a show on Spider-Man, but I think that's a really good example because he's not supposed to say yes to being Iron Man. No. He's supposed to be saying yes to being a really good Spider-Man.
And I think that's a trap we can fall into at this, is being like, I'm saying yes to doing this, so I should be like that person who also does this.
Yeah. Well, and Danielle Rose, one of the singers I was talking about earlier, she has this song called The Saint That Is Just Me. And so the whole song is about how growing up, she wanted to be like all these great saints. And she goes through all their stories. And then she's like, I realized like God didn't want me to be like Saint Therese or any of these great saints. She wanted me to be a saint myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one funny thing is a lot of the things he starts saying yes to come in handy. So like he's helping his friend's fiance now throw a bridal shower.
Okay.
And they're trying to pick stuff at this shop, and the woman that works there is just like giving the cold shoulder, and then she starts like saying something mean about them in Korean, and so he walks up and he starts speaking to her in Korean. He's like, "What's wrong? I see you like a bad day," and she's just like, "I am having a bad day. Everyone I see is getting married. When am I gonna get married?" And he's like, "Look, see this woman? She hates my guts, and you'd be helping me out if you threw like the best bridal shower for her." And he like makes her laugh, and she's like, "Okay," and like he fixes that situation. And then later, this guy is on top of like a skyscraper and is going to jump, and he's there, and the lady down at the bottom is like, "The cops aren't getting here in time. Someone needs to go do something." So he runs up, and he can't think of anything to do, but he sees a guitar, and the one song he learned was "Jumper" by.
Wish you would
Yeah,
step
so he
back
grabs
from
that and
ledge,
plays that,
my
which was in the
friend.
trailer, and saves this guy's life.
Wow.
And he actually gets promoted because even though he was red flagged for giving out so many loans, because he was giving out so many loans and the people were like good to their word, they're actually making more money back. So like 98% of people are actually paying back the loans on time. So it's like, seems like a stupid idea, but worked out.
Because he treated them well.
Yes. In the same sense, he goes to Lincoln, Nebraska randomly with Allison. They just go and they just pick the first flight out. And on the way back, he gets picked up by the people in the airport that stop you.
Oh, TSA.
Yes, because they're like, "Do you hate this country?" He's like, "No." He's like, "Well, why are you trying to marry someone from Persia and learning Korean and learning how to fly a plane and going to Lincoln, Nebraska randomly and back? Because who goes there?" And
Good point. Good point.
And so that was I put that in there because of what you said. Saying yes
attacked.
to everything isn't always good. He wasn't doing anything bad necessarily, but it doesn't always work out. And one thing I forgot to mention is every time he's tried to say no, bad things start happening. So he's superstitious, where he thinks like this covenant actually will like bad things will happen if he says no. So he's kind of forced to say yes. So he runs after him and Allison had this fallout to Terrence. And he's like, "I need you to remove the covenant." And Terrence's like, "There is no covenant. There wasn't. I was just riffing." And he's like, "Riffing?" He's like, "Yeah, I just had to say something because you were being difficult, embarrassing me in front of my crowd." It's like, "So that little yes thing was all BS?" And he's like, "No, you just don't know how to use it. That's all." It's like, "Yeah, I do. Say yes to everything. Real tough to grasp." It's like, "No, that's not the point. I mean, maybe at first, but that's just to get you like open to it and to realize it leads to good things. But then you start saying yes, not because you have to, not because the covenant tells you to, but because you know in your heart that you want to."
Ooh.
And you literally already covered this, but...
Yeah, but I think there's something more to go off of this, too.
Go ahead.
I think this has to do with charity.
Yeah, okay.
And even morality, too. So, a lot of the times, let's start with one at a time. So, let's start with charity. So, a lot of times we feel like we have to do something nice to someone. So, like, we see a homeless person and we just, like, we feel guilty. And so we help them. Or we do a service project because it's required for confirmation.
Right.
And we hate every second of it. But in the process, we learn to love, to give of ourselves. And we might find something that's a talent of ours. And maybe that's part of the adventure that we're called to. Maybe that's part of our journey, our spiritual journey, where maybe I just really have a service for cooking. And so I start cooking meals for people. And like, that's my way of loving people. And I wouldn't have discovered that if I wasn't doing these service projects. If any of my confirmation students are listening right now, this is why we do it.
Totally.
But it's to help you discover a desire to love.
Right.
And it's not supposed to stay with these rules of you have to do this. It's supposed to inspire you to go beyond that to where you, like it said, but because you know in your heart that you want to.
Right.
And that's what it's supposed to inspire. And the same thing for morality, where I was talking about how a lot of people think that the church is just a place of rules. Mm-hmm. I know a couple months ago, I was getting my hair done at the barber, and the lady was just trying to make conversation. It's like, "So what do you do for a living?" And I'm like, "Great, here we go. We got 20 minutes of a blade next to my face, and we were talking about the church." And I'm like, "Actually, I work for the Catholic Church." She's like, "Oh, isn't that just a place of like a bunch of rules and stuff?" I'm like, A lot of people think that. And so we had a little bit of a conversation about it. But that's what people see when they, or think about when they see the Catholic Church, is just a bunch of rules. And to a certain extent, that's true. But I don't want to beat a dead horse because we've talked about this before, but rules are not a bad thing. We accept rules everywhere in our life. Sports, driving, work, like the government. Like, we accept rules all the time because they're good for society and good for humanity, and they guide us to a goal. If there's no rules, there's no goal. And we all realize that there's goals in life, and that's important. But one of the examples that I love is Bishop Barron uses the example of baseball. And so when you first start playing baseball, you might hate the rules because it makes the game difficult. But as you get good and as you practice and as you grow to love the game, you grow to love the rules because the rules are what make the game the game.
Right, exactly.
If you could use your feet, or you could just, like, instead of hitting the ball, you just, like, punch the catcher, steal the ball, and throw it. Like, that's a different game. That's like some kind of Australian baseball.
That's not baseball.
It's not baseball.
Yeah.
It's weird.
It is weird that we hate rules, but we hate cheaters even more.
Yeah.
But how can someone cheat if there are no rules to bend?
I think we only hate rules when we dislike the game. You know? Or
that's true.
Not even that, because I feel like we don't have a problem with rules in the general sense unless it's inconvenient. Right. Which is why we dislike a lot of morality. Yeah. Because it's inconvenient. And particularly I think the rules that we struggle with the most and people hate the most are ones in regards to sexuality. Because they're inconvenient and they're not fun. Right. You know? And so it's kind of like a pick and choose. But I think overall, like, there's something inside of us, like it says, we realize in our heart that we like rules because it gives structure. And as humans, we desire that kind of structure. That's why even in the Old Testament, it was the Israelites who begged God for a king because they needed structure. Yeah. And the God's like, no, you guys don't want a king. Like, everyone else has a king. You guys are going to be different. You can do this and you're going to follow me and I will be your king. They're like, no, we still want a king. Can you give us a king? And they keep going back and forth, and eventually God's like, okay, you have a king. And the irony is the descendant of that king ended up being Jesus. So it was like, gotcha.
Right. And it's also funny because like technically the yes men or the rule followers of the day of Jesus were the people that killed him. Yeah. What I was thinking as I was just reading this, I'm gonna read it again. Actually, it's like that wasn't the point, saying yes to everything. He's like, well, maybe at first it is, but that's just to open you up to it. And so I think about that as like what you and I do with youth ministry, because we're explaining like the commandments and like what God is calling us into. This covenant means these 10 things, and people are like, I can't like lie sometimes if it helps me, or like these things, and you're like, yeah, but if you actually follow them to a T and live it out, you'll realize how much you're talking about, how much freer our lives are. And then it changes from not doing it just because you have to or because the covenant tells you to, but because your heart actually has been shaped to desire that now. Yeah, and Jesus actually points that out too, because you're talking about the priests at the time and who by that point were just like, we're doing this because Jesus said, but their heart isn't there. Yeah, well, even Jesus points out though, he's like, you're like, these are the laws of man. So most of the rules that they were like all anal about in the like his time period were rules that they had made up in the last couple hundred years, and they weren't even the rules of Moses. So if you look back into the Pentateuch, the first five books, those rules aren't there, and those are the rules, right? So if they're not there, they're not actually the rules, you know. And so the stuff that these guys are all angry about that people aren't following and that they're doing, and so they feel so righteous about, aren't even real rules. And so Jesus points out that it's the heart of the law, and you're missing the point. You're doing the rules, but you're missing the heart. And I think that's what this is getting at. Yeah. And so in the end, he realizes this whole thing and is like, well, I got to go fix things with Allison, because essentially one thing I didn't really cover is they fall out because Allison realizes about this yes thing. And she's like, well, if you say yes to everything, how do I know that like you actually wanted to be with me? You actually like everything you've said to me isn't just because you have to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so he goes to her and they're having this conversation and he's explaining like, oh, I realize like I don't say yes all the time, but just when I like want to. And she's like, yeah, like she's annoyed, but she's like, this sounds like great. And he's like, but listen, if I didn't do this thing, I wouldn't have never have met you, because the old Carl didn't think that he was enough for anybody. I thought of that. I said yes to things and got involved with people. Then sooner or later they'd find out that I'm not enough. But I didn't think that I had anything to share. But now I know that what I have is pretty huge, and I want to share it with you. And even if I had met you, I would have never asked you out, because you were the complete opposite of me. And you did things, and you had friends, and you sang in rock bands, and you made life happen, and you weren't scared of anything. She's like, you don't think I'm scared of anything? Who do you think I am? I'm scared of a lot of things. He's like, and I'm scared too. So let's be scared together. And she's like, I just don't know what you want me to say. He's like, just say yes, but only if you want to. And she ends up saying maybe. He's like, I'm cool with maybe.
Of course she does.
Yeah. She's like, I just don't want to say that word. She's too salty about it right
now. Yeah. Talk to me later.
Yeah. But I just his bit is the biggest, because that goes back to the beginning where I said saying yes is so scary. And because when you say yes to something, it, especially if you're talking about covenants, it's an offering of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we don't like who we are, because we don't really know who we are, because we have to say yes to this covenant to find out.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something I wanted to bring up before, is that a covenant is more than just a contract. A lot of times we think that it's a contract where there's agreements on two parts, when in reality, a covenant in the Hebrew sense is a giving of self, where families are bonded together, which is why it actually fits that we were talking about baptism before, where our entrance into Christianity through our baptism is a covenant with God, where we enter into his family. And it's something where it's really, a covenant is really under the power of the patriarch of that family, because the people entering into the family, they can do stuff and there's stuff that's expected of them, but in reality, everything comes down to the patriarch and their power in welcoming someone into that family. And it's the same thing with our relationship with God, where no matter what we do, it ultimately comes down to whether or not God wants us in his family. And the answer is always yes.
Right.
Which is actually really convenient. I didn't plan that. But yeah, he always wants us in, and he's constantly reaching out for us. And that's what the entire story of scripture is about, is him reaching out. And everyone else, like, the Hebrew is pushing away, like, we don't want to be in your family anymore. We want to do this. But he just keeps pulling them back. But I think what you're saying with Carl is exactly it, where I'm going to keep tying it back to Bilbo, because I think that's a good example
that's
too,
fine.
Where they both feel like they're comfortable where they are, or they're scared of what might happen next, and they're scared that they aren't good enough.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where we are in our adventure too, when we're afraid of where God's calling us, or we're not willing to listen. Maybe, I don't know, I was having a conversation recently about vocations, and just how a lot of the times, first off, a lot of us just don't even think about vocations, but when we do, we don't know where to look, or we feel like, I can't do that. Even in the context of marriage. Like, anyone who said that marriage is like the default, like, you're crazy. There's a reason why there's two people in marriage and only one in priesthood and religious life. It's hard. But yeah, so just like being afraid to pursue your vocation, I think, and being afraid of like whatever God's calling you to, when in reality we need to say yes when he presents us with something.
And that leads right into my challenge. It's not, I mean, I want to paint a little better, but because we're doing Exodus, there was I think it was yesterday's or 2 days ago, reflection that just really hit home the best. I think it was yesterday's. And we're going through the story of Exodus, and obviously it's one of those things where you hear over and over again, Pharaoh hardened his heart as like Moses is trying to plead God with God's words. And finally we hit to the point where it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And I think the Exodus reflection explained that the best. But
oh yeah, that was such a good reflection.
When if we have to start this way, because I don't know who's listening or where you're at, but let's start here. If God is real, and he is who he says he is, then the things we want are going to do two things. They're going to be elevated, and our hearts will be softened with joy and compassion, and like everything that we've wanted in life is met, or the things that we want, ultimately our hearts will be hardened because they're not what we know God wants. And so I want you to sit with that, because God's always calling us into something, and usually that thing is some sort of change, some sort of essentially adventure, the things we talk about, but that adventure is going to cause, in the adventures of discipleship, it's like the third thing, which is it's going to be turmoil and hardship.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, those that's going to arise, but that's going to change you, like we said in that hero's arc. So sit down and just sit with the idea of, if God is real and he is who he says he is, what does that mean he wants of me? And is your heart hardened with that thought, or is it softened? And just, I don't know, try to say, I'm not saying say yes to it if it's hardened, but sit with why, and just sit in that, and take some sort of small measure to maybe desiring to say yes.
Yeah, I think I would add to that. Father Mike Schmitz talks about some tips for discernment, not just for priesthood, but just like discernment in general. And he talks about how when you're starting, you shouldn't focus on what is my capital V vocation, right? Am I supposed to get married? Am I supposed to be a priest? Am I supposed to be a nun or religious? You need to start by, first off, having constant prayer. But also the other thing that he says is saying yes and doing the right thing in the small things. Because when you're doing the right thing in the small things, you are preparing your heart to receive God. So just like Advent was a whole season of preparing our hearts to receive God, similarly, Lent, which we're about to start in a couple weeks, is also preparing us to receive God coming at the resurrection, right? And so we're about to have this whole period where this is really, really important. But the example you were talking about from Exodus, it's really, really cool, because they talked about how when you prepare yourself like butter, which is soft, or you prepare yourself like clay, which is kind of firm, and you put them in the sun, God being the sun, they react differently. Right. So if you soften your heart and you're preparing yourself, when God comes and he shines his light on you, if you've made yourself like butter, you will melt, which is softening your heart. But if you've prepared yourself like clay and you've turned yourself away from God in those places where he's been calling you, you're going to only become more rigid and harden your heart even more, like a pot.
Yeah. And what it says, and this is actually something it's good to add, is if you're sitting with that question, if God is real and he is who he says he is, what does that mean of me? It says when we're praying and we might be more like clay, usually it's when you get frustrated in prayer, or when you get anxious, or when you have doubts. So if that thought, what does that mean of me, causes those feelings, and that means he is calling you into something that is scary to you, and that you've probably been saying no to, and at this point maybe you didn't even know it. And so you're like, okay, what is that? Why? And if maybe that's as much as this challenge will take you, you don't know what the answer is, but you're just like, what is that and why? And just sit with that. That's really my challenge.
Cool. The other thing I would add as a challenge is find something that's difficult for you that you know you should have done a long time ago, or maybe not so long ago, and do it.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's exercising, right? That's a pretty common example, right?
Guilty.
Right? I know I should have been going to the gym, and I know I've been saying this for years, and I just haven't. Do it. This week, whatever that thing is that's really been getting at you, don't make it a big thing. Don't start with like, I'm going to go to the gym every day for 2 hours every day. Like, don't do that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's, I'm going to eat a healthy meal, or I'm going to go to the gym once this week.
And to be fair, if you're doing that because you're like, I'm trying to make healthy habits, or I'm trying to do this yes thing to build something to move on, the little voice that's like right before you, like, you know, you're like on Tuesday, you're like, I want to work out tomorrow, and you're so amped, but then you go to do it the next day and you're like, I don't want to do this. That's like, on a certain level, it could be spiritual attack, because it's like, sure, I know this is making a good habit out of you, and I know it's going to lead to something spiritually good. No. Yeah,
that's from the Screw Tape letters too.
Yeah, it's that minor. So that's why it's like, you don't do something big, do something small, because even that's going to be attacked. So yeah, shout outs. Wait, you go. Yeah,
I have one.
Oh, you have a shout out?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I want to give a shout out to a new listener who was texting me this week about the show, and she was just super excited.
Sweet.
Annalisa Harley.
No.
I've never said that as her last name before.
She listens to the podcast?
She just started listening.
Wow.
Yeah, so
she doesn't know who I am yet.
No, she started listening to the new ones.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she started from season 3, so she knows who you are.
Oh, okay.
And also, you've met her. We were literally just at our
I
house
was
the other
just
day.
kidding.
I was like, what the heck? But yeah, so I convinced her to start reading C.S. Lewis's
She
Chronicles of
practically
Narnia.
married us.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's true. Well, she was there. She helped a lot.
She's why I'm one person.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I convinced her to start reading C.S. Lewis, and it got her so hyped that she wanted to see what the show was about. So
cool.
She's been checking it out and loved the Two Popes episode.
Oh, wow.
So
nice.
Do you have any shout-outs?
I'm really bad at this part as of late. Lizzie, Nick Sackford. I know we've gotten feedback and people don't like shouting at the same people, and so I'm trying not to do that.
If you don't like it, then reach out to us. We'll give you a shout out instead.
No. I know you guys listen, and I want to shout you guys out, but it's really just been work and Lizzie right now. I shout out Nick because it's been a long time since I've seen him, and I know he listens, even though I probably won't hear this for a while. But yeah, really just you guys that make this happen. Yeah. Thank you. I don't know. That's it.
Cool. With that, thank you guys for joining us on the adventure this week. We are the Christ in Culture. We're so excited to have you guys here.
We have things that you can check out if you like us.
You can follow us on the social medias, which would be Facebook, The Christ in Culture, YouTube, The Christ in Culture, where you can find all these episodes as videos. You can find us on Twitter at OnTheAdventure2. You can also check out all of our stuff at our website, where you can also find out who our guests are, a little bit about them, a little bit about us, our blog, all that cool stuff, which is thechristinculture.com. And if you enjoy what we do and want to become one of our patrons, you can support us for as little as $5 a month. And in return, you will get bonus content, prizes, hangout sessions with us, different stuff like that. And you can find that at patreon.com/thechristinculture.
You can also support us for as much as $200 a month.
Yeah. Or, your whole salary.
Yeah.
Whatever you decide. God says to give from your wealth and from your lack of wealth.
Not because you have to or the covenant tells you to.
But because you know in your heart that you want to. And with that, thank you, and we'll see you guys next week.